Hi, this is Loretta. I'm on the line now with Jayaram Krishnaswamy, who is a long time reader, and he's contacted me with a number of really good questions. So we're going to discuss them. And I will just quickly mention how we come to be talking about this. So Jay is an engineer in Canada, and he's also an eager follower of Sri Bhagavat. And he has been having a longstanding interest in Buddhism and Eastern spirituality, and he found that my work was able to provide that link, that engineering perspective of the practical insight into what makes these insights, these spiritual insights, actually feel real. So that's where his questions come from, and let's start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Loretta. My first question for this evening is, now you say we have five chemicals which mainly like pull or push our intellectual thinking, which is like in a computer unemotional. So now this five chemical, and I believe it is generated in some part of the body, like um, some of our endocrine glands. So if so, now either over generation of these chemicals or biologically non-generation of these chemicals, how does it affect our emotional viewing of this world? Like if some of these chemicals are not generated, then won't we have those emotions or those pushes?
Okay. You said in the beginning something like a computer, like that it's unemotional. So that mechanical aspect that's unemotional is the neural pathways. They are real physical things. So when a person looks at the world, it's a pattern of input that comes into your senses, which triggers patterns of electricity that flow through the pathways you have. So that's sort of physiological, mechanical. And for each individual, whatever pathways you have sort of influences where can the electricity go. It has to use pathways that are there. Now, to the extent that we have free will, it's limited. It's just when there's a flow to say stop, like putting on the brakes, sort of like a car. You can stop the car and drive the car down a different road, but your car can't build a road. So that's sort of, it's sort of like that. I mean, we can build a road, but you can't build it while you're driving, sort of. So that's the sort of mechanical aspect. Now, when you say what happens if you don't produce these emotions, so first, that's the medical model, the disease view, that a person is somehow defective and therefore not producing them. But my view is that we're not meant to produce them all the time. They're not meant to just be on effortlessly and just flow. And you know that because you've read all the books. So I think on a deeper level, you're thinking, yeah, but what if a person really has a deficiency? So two things. One, we talked about how the physical manufacturing of these chemicals, so the main thing it requires is like fat and sleep. So those are the two things. Everybody wants it to be some other things, but we make these chemicals in our sleep and we need fat to make them. Now, what if you say, well, what if somebody still doesn't have enough? So let's use the example of a monkey who gets dopamine from seeking a fruit, who gets serotonin from asserting its strength to reach for a fruit, for oxytocin from finding social trust. Now, it would be meaningless to say, oh, that monkey doesn't have enough of these chemicals, because you only get the chemicals by putting yourself in a context where they're generated. So they're signals that a reward is at hand, and you have to take the action steps toward the reward in order to keep stimulating them. And that's the part that the medical model doesn't talk about. They make it sound like you're entitled to them. And if you haven't gotten your share, then the doctor has to give them to you, or society has to give them to you. And I think that's not really a useful way to think about them.
Oh, I see. Thank you, ma'am. My second question is, okay, so now we a thought comes and we're thinking about it, and then the emotion comes. It could be jealousy, it could be a motivation, and it could be cortisol or any of these
Oh,
chemicals.
by the way, I'm sorry. I'm just like, I'll always worry about my last answer. But
Yeah,
um, when I say you need fat to make them,
yeah,
that doesn't mean that if you eat more fat, you're going to eat more. Right. So it's just for people who totally deprive themselves of fat, then
yeah.
they deprive themselves of hormones. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. I mean, even that begs a question. So, people who has got more fat doesn't mean that they're going to be more emotional also.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Okay, the next question I want to ask is, okay, so now a thought came and we are thinking about it, and then lots of emotions appeared in our body. Then these chemicals, can I assume, like, and let's assume I'm just sitting in my room and I'm worried about an insult which happened 10 years ago, or a failure which happened 5 years ago, or what can happen 5 years later. If I'm thinking all these things, then lots of chemicals are generated. Now, if there is no action required, what will happen to this chemical? They just will it mix with the blood and like vanish?
Yes, yes, they get excreted in a short time. With the negative feelings, which it sounds like you were referring to, cortisol,
Yeah.
there's been a bunch of research on this, and it's in my forthcoming book, Tame Your Anxiety, next spring. But I've mentioned this in all my work. Cortisol has a half-life of 20 minutes. So however much cortisol I release, half of it will be gone in 20 minutes. So that means in 40 minutes, I'll be done with 75% of it. And
Okay.
you engineers can go on and,
Yeah.
asymptotically.
Yeah.
So, but the trick is
Yeah.
that you only excrete it, you're only free of it if you don't trigger more
Oh,
during that time. But
hmm.
most people trigger more
Yeah.
because once it turns on, it tells you you're threatened, and that's your brain signal to look for evidence of threat. Once you look, you're very good at finding it. So therefore, you think, oh, that thing that happened 5 years ago, oh, that's so frustrating. And you think about it and think about it and you do more. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, ma'am. I mean, more you provide an explanation, it'll be helpful for more of the future readers or people who are viewing this. So, if I, even though unconsciously the emotion comes as a shadow, especially the cortisol, it will go away unless we don't pick it up and like continue to go in that path. So is that the scenario? Yesterday you answered about, okay, if I get that cortisol, if I feel the pain or the suffering or the or other bad feeling, then I can go to drink a lemonade or do some exercise. Is that how I temporarily move away from it?
Good question. And by the way, I forgot to say in the beginning that I wanted to tell listeners that you have a YouTube channel. So if they're
Yeah.
interested in learning more about the spiritual practice behind your questions, that you have a lot on that. Good. Sorry, I forgot that. So yes, this is the idea I talk about in a lot of my work. We could call it distraction, just on a simple level, so that instead of looping on this negative perception that you're having, that you focus on something else. However, for many people, like when you say, I'm going to have a lemonade, do exercise, we all know that it's possible to worry while you're exercising. It's possible to worry while you're drinking the lemonade. So the bottom line is to find something that busies your mind. And this is again, I have a lot more on this in my new book, Tame Your Anxiety, which will be out next spring. So spring 2019, just depending on who's listening. And the bottom line is you really have to think about something else, which is why I think a lot of people who do crossword puzzles and video games, that's why people are drawn toward these activities because they activate your mind and enough that it's impossible to worry while you're doing that other thing. So I'm not advocating crossword puzzles. I'm saying find your own equivalent of that. And what I mention in all my books is that I find that listening to videos in a foreign language completely does it for me, because it's so hard for me to make sense of what's going on. I have to listen so hard that I can't think about anything else, and it just clears the circuits. So I know that many people like the concept of meditation or mindfulness for that. But for those of you who don't like that, or those of you who have tried it, and as just with fat, like more and more and more of the same thing is not always the answer. So try something else. Try something fun. So that's why I always suggest comedy. Like everyone has a things to do list, but I advocate a fun to do list. Have a list of things that are fun, but you can also fit them into your day. And there are also things that don't have bad long run consequences.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So now we all know that if we are continuously worried about something, tensed about something, there's more psychological stress, then people will become sick, and they'll go, even their body will become sick. Is it because of lots and lots of repeated cortisol releasing in the body? Does the body become sick? Or how does the long term worrying and psychological suffering make the body sick? I mean, from the point of view of the chemicals.
Okay, this is not totally known, I think, and it's controversial.
Oh,
And I think people tend to use it conveniently. Like if someone's mad at the world, then they can say, our world is so bad that it's making people sick. And they're only focused on the thing that they're angry at. But then if that person gets cancer, then they don't want to hear that their worrying gave them cancer, because they find that offensive. And therefore, people use this selectively. So I'm not going to take any extreme position. But one thing I'll say is, number one, your immune system requires energy. So the more down you are in terms of wasting your energy on stress, the less energy your immune system has to fight threats. That's one thing. And the other thing is muscle tension. So the more you feel threatened, when your muscles tension, it limits the circulation, it limits the oxygen that gets to your tissues. And that is all giving you more wear and tear on your body and less resilience, right?
okay. Yeah, right.
Yeah, oxygen. And the other thing, again, is as we all know, like your body is always processing toxins, and we can have a positive view. It was like, my body takes in toxins and it eliminates them. And
Yep.
then there are people of like, oh, our world is so awful. There's toxins everywhere. It's horrible. So that in a way could weaken you. On the other hand, I was recently on a trip to Mexico, where there's a huge amount of construction and much less regulation. And so the construction workers were working with these very harsh chemicals. And as I walked by, I could smell them, and they were even closer. So we can really take responsibility, and again, there's always a moderation. Like, you don't want to be a total terrified, paranoid fear of every chemical. But on the other hand, you don't want to blame society for the chemicals and then keep exposing yourself. So,
Thank you, ma'am. So my next question is to continue this idea. So now, if I see that there is no action required, I'm tensed or suffering and all those things, you you said like we can see if we can get some other way where we can focus our mind, or I also read that you say you can build positive neural pathways so that next time when I think of it, I will not be unhappy or sad. So now so I have both the choices, right? I can consciously think and see if I can build a positive neural pathway, or I can actually take some actions here now in the external world, where in which I'm engaged my mind fully. So there's both the options. Is it like, do you select which should be done at what time?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Great question. First, I want to explain more. When you say no action required, I want to tell listeners that you explained that very clearly in our prior discussion. And that discussion is going to be available after this recording. The tradition of your guru explains that, and I think of Buddhism in general, that when a person has a sense of urgency, they can separate it into urgency that requires immediate action and urgency that feels urgent, but you consciously know that it doesn't require immediate action.
Action, that is the
Right,
keyword. Yeah.
right. But my keyword is consciously, because once cortisol flows and you feel bad, it's hard to distinguish whether you need to take action or not. And a simple example would be, simple example is that when people get very upset about either, let's say, a boss, a coworker, a spouse, that really they're activating a circuit of someone who hurt them in childhood. So that's what's triggering all the chemistry. And it tells you, oh, I'm so mad at that person, I got to do something. But really, maybe you're better off not making a big deal out of it, but you just feel all those chemicals because of your old circuit. Now, of course, it could be the opposite. It could be that when you were young, you never took action, and maybe in your present life, you need to take action. So the whole point rests, as you correctly said, on distinguishing between the old circuits and the current reality. So what I call it, basically, the automatic child brain, and then the new circuits that you've built in your adult life that can adjust for those child circuits that'll always be there because they're the myelinated foundation. Now, to get to your question, so you said, how does a person decide between, should I just basically, did you say do nothing versus build a new pathway?
Uh,
Was that the choice?
no, ma'am. Doing nothing is a choice, obviously. But then, from your point of view, you said you should see if you can build a positive neural pathway, is option one. Option two is engage your mind with something.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's what I meant by sort of doing nothing about the problem, but just, yeah, okay, yeah, very good. So the reason I thanked you for that question was because I have a methodology in my forthcoming book, Tame Your Anxiety. It sounds like I fed you these questions to promote my book, but I really didn't. So you're reading my mind here. So I think both of them are necessary, because if you just distract yourself and never take action, then you're going to end up feeling sort of bitter and resentful and powerless and missing out. On the other hand, if you rush into action and don't give your chemicals a time to dissipate, then, to use the old cliche, you may regret your action. So to have a methodology to do both. And the methodology that I give in my book is this. Some people have a preference for one. I'm just going to distract myself and not think about it. Some people have a preference for the other. I'm going to rush into. So it's to have a regular tool so that you always do all of them and then finish up. So the idea is to do something that makes you feel good, to relieve the bad feelings so you can focus on positive solutions. Because while you're feeling bad, you say, there are no positive solutions. There's nothing I can do about it. So you have to let some of your chemicals metabolize before you can properly construct a solution. At that point, then, you have to construct the solution and act immediately, because otherwise you'll delay. No solution will be good enough. You'll keep second guessing yourself, or you'll say, well, the steps I need to take are not possible because either I don't have the time or money, or because of that jerk, and it's all their fault for being in my way. So the method revolves around, after you let your cortisol fall, take 1 minute, set a timer, and find a step that you can take. Now, it may be not the whole package, but find a step that's small enough that you can take today. And when you do that, then you'll feel great. So hopefully you could take it right now immediately, but with 60 seconds, write it down, choose it, write it down, and make sure it's something you can take by the end of the day. And before you do all this, what it's called a 3-step taming tool. The first step is to focus on what you want. Okay. So when you're having this bad feeling, you're very aware of what you don't want. So you want to shift your attention to what you want rather than what you don't want. So most people will start off as saying, I want you to stop being a jerk, right? I want the world to stop getting in my way. I want money to fall from the sky. I want to win the lottery. So how can I, in 1 minute, set a timer? How can I define my wants in a realistic, doable way? And the way I explain that is a dopamine way, a serotonin way, an oxytocin way. In other words, what do I really need right now? Is it really a reward that I'm after? Is it acceptance? Or is it feeling special? And often you can't get both. You can't get all three at the same time. You got to make trade-offs. And so when you clarify and you're honest with yourself, yeah, I really care about being special. Yeah, I really care about acceptance. Yeah, I really care about approaching that reward. Then you can get what you want when you focus on it, but you have to admit to yourself and focus on it. And
Okay.
I'll even give credit to Dr. Phil. He said, you have to claim it to name it.
Oh, I see. To begin
No,
with.
no, I said it backwards. You have to name it to claim it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You have to name it to claim it.
Okay. Thanks, ma'am. And while answering this question now, you spoke about myelin, which is solidified at the end of your teenagers, and nothing will, and then it doesn't change much. But even as a person, you have changed. You would have changed a lot from your teenagers. Even all the understanding which you have about working with this mammal and seeing those very unique insights which we have not seen, and then applying it in your own mind and society. There are
Mhm.
so many things you have learned, including doing your PhD.
Yes.
So when you look back at Loretta at like the teenage when it is ended, and after that, like you have changed. Like every 10, 15 years, people will change. Lots of things have added, and new understanding, new insights, and with that insight, you look back and many things are understanding. So how is all those learning added upon after your end of your teenage years?
Well, I can't tell you how many times a day I stop and think, oh my God, I'm really just doing the same thing I did when I was a teenager.
Oh,
So I think if most people stop and think about it, they may find themselves realizing that they are sort of repeating those impulses that they had when they were a teenager. It's like a core pathway. Let's explain it for each of the chemicals.
yeah.
For oxytocin, it would be, who should you trust? Who should you not trust? And it's not individual people, but like in what context, in what situations, and what kind of people, when should I trust and when should I not trust? So if people think about it, they'll say, wow, I'm basically doing the same kind of things. I'll just give you a simple example. Uh, I it's almost easier for me to trust strangers.
Mhm.
Like when I was a kid, if I would raise my hand in class, like that didn't scare me at all
Right.
because it's an arm's length situation, and when you raise your hand in class, I got more respect from teachers than I did when I spoke at home. So that felt like a safe situation to me. And so in that context, like I always use the funny example when I was a college professor. I would speak to 150 people and that didn't bother me. But then if one of them came to my office, then that bothered me. You know what I mean? Because, when someone comes to your office, then they're not on their best behavior anymore, because then they start, remember we talked about like the drowning person that wants you to drown with them. So that would be just a simple example of how people can understand their old pathways. So that's oxytocin. Now let's do the dopamine one. Old dopamine circuits tell you which rewards are worth investing in. And if people think about their teenage years and think about how you decide when to invest your energy and when do you say, oh, I'm not going to bother, I'm never going to get it. Like when a monkey decides which fruit to climb after, which fruit tree to climb into. So we're always deciding which rewards are worth it and which are not. Now, serotonin, how to be special. Everyone has that old feeling of this way to be special is good, is going to work, and this is not. Again, I have a funny, strange, like atypical, but then everybody is atypical when they think about it. So many people, to be special, they like to be the center of attention or something. But I feel more special when I'm alone, because like when I'm alone, like let's say if I go into a situation where I can pick whatever I want. Whereas when I'm with other people, I have to adjust to what they want. So I love to be in a situation where it's like, oh, I know that I could go in there and pick whatever I want. That was when I was young, it was so rare that I got to have choice that, I feel so good about having choice. So that's just an example. And again, as I explain in my books, it's not just teen, but it's under age 8 and during puberty, which is when we have a lot of myelin and when we build those foundational circuits. Now, as you've said, of course, we've all had lots of experience after that, but so much of that experience is we're so good at making excuses to justify those old impulses, or maybe to pull them off more successfully, to do it better rather than to really do something different.
Okay. You spoke about oxytocin and how we have this innate nature to go and mingle with people. But then, why are some people introverts? Like by default, if oxytocin is what we need, then everybody should be outgoing and go hang out and get the oxytocin and be happy. Why is
Okay,
some people intentionally
good,
want to stay introvert and never talk to
good.
people? Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't say outgoing, I said trust. So in the animal, if we go back to think about it in the animal world, animals look for safety in numbers. But when an animal sees a group, then it's safer in the group. But if it walks toward individuals who are bad, then it's less safe. So the animal makes careful decisions about which individuals to trust and which individuals to not trust. And in the state of nature, they're very particular about, this is my herd, this is not my herd. If I walk toward those monkeys, they're going to bite me. Whereas if I walk toward those monkeys, they're not going to bite me. And David Attenborough's nature videos makes this really, really clear. So why are some people introverts? Well, because these circuits are built from early experience, if you have a lot of bad early experiences with trust, then you see one herd and you think, oh, I better not trust them. I better not trust them. I better not trust them. So why don't you trust them? It could be a variety of reasons depending on the individual experience. It could be that you anticipate that they're going to hurt you in a predatory way, or it could be that you anticipate that they're going to reject you or put you down, put you in the one down position. Now, in the animal world, animals will go to the herd even if they're put in a one down position if there are predators nearby, because it's better to be in a herd than alone, even if you're at the bottom of the ladder. And then after that, then they work to rise in the ladder. So it's all very distressing and complicated. And yet, when you watch David Attenborough's monkey videos, it's like, oh, yeah.
Okay. So similarly, even if somebody has got an outgoing personality by default, who will
Yes,
just
yes,
go out and talk, it
yes.
is the opposite then. So when he grew up, everybody was friendly with around him and they helped him. He has got good experiences. So by default, he will trust
Wow.
the stranger. Is it so?
That's yes, every one of these has a good side and a bad side. I
Okay.
totally don't agree with this idea of like who got the good genes or the good personality or the good childhood. Everything has pros and cons and trade-offs.
Hmm.
So, an extrovert, many extroverts cannot tolerate being alone. So, they will to put up with any crap, excuse my language, they will put up with anything just to not be alone. That's one type of extrovert. Another type of extrovert, they want to be with people, but they want to be the center of attention.
Yeah.
So even when they're with people, they're not really happy until they get to be the center of attention. So nobody has this like easy path to I'm happy all the time.
Hmm. Okay. Thanks, ma'am. Another question I have is because of my understanding and observation. So, from what I've read and what I observed in my own mind is our unconscious starts a thought and then it becomes a thinking, like we continues to think. And then for this thinking, based on what the mental picture shows, our body secretes these emotional chemicals. So, all of these emotional chemicals are only the shadow or like a background score of the thoughts which come is what my understanding is what I read. Do you also agree with this or uh, how does it work? Yeah.
I know what you're saying. It's a combination of thoughts and context. So, and much of the thoughts are not in words. And the simplest example I could give you is let's say if you walk into your office and your boss is there, and your boss has this really scary look on their face and then just walks out. So everyone knows that feeling like, oh, you may have like lots of cortisol all of a sudden. And he didn't even say anything. You didn't think anything in words, but you just get this bad feeling. Now, perhaps it's a similar expression they had to some very critical person in your childhood, for example. Or maybe it's that the boss really is a jerk and is on your case a lot, you know?
No, ma'am. What I think is when I look at okay, so now this is the whole point of cognition comes into picture. I
Mm.
believe. So you look at your boss. You know you are the employee and he is your boss. You recognize that. See, if you're not seen him or did not recognize him, let us say your angry boss is standing somewhere else. You have not looked at him. You're looking at somewhere and doing some work. Then it's not going to affect you. You looked at your boss and you're recognized and if you are to recognize that he is in a happy mode, maybe you will be happy. I mean, you will first recognize it and then you understand the situation, and like a shadow, the emotion comes, right? So, I believe you have recognized, you have your mind, your eyes have seen, your your cortex has understood him and recognized him. The full cognition has happened. Then even these are all now pictorial now. Then your words or the thoughts fix into it, and it interprets it. Okay, now this is a your boss is angry. Now this is a bad situation. I might lose my job. Or if he looks at the boss, he's in a happy situation. Okay, now this is good. Everything is good. I can be happy now. I can smile. So for me, it looks like there is surely a recognition because if you don't even look at your boss, then if you're looking somewhere else, then there is no unhappiness or happiness.
Okay. What would be a healthy way to think? And I was talking more about maybe the common unhealthy way to think. Is that possible?
No, ma'am. I mean, my intent of the question is I want to understand in a logical order how does this whole thing work? Step by step. I want to break it down and see first a cognition or a recognition happen, or you see in the external world, you recognize in your mind, okay, this situation, then you think, then only the emotions come based on the context or the understanding of the current situation or the scenario where you are in. Based on your thinking, only the emotions secrete, or the happy chemicals or cortisol secrete based on this thing. I want to understand that this is the clear order.
Okay, so in this foundation that we've myelinated when we're young,
Yeah.
the connections are already there between, let's just generally call it approval and disapproval.
Okay.
So every young person has a general collection of experiences of somebody approves of me,
Right.
it feels good. So they build a neural link between behaviors and the looks on people's faces, the words, a whole cluster, and that builds a neural pathway to the positive chemistry. And that all gets myelinated. So then in the future, when you see someone who fits that cluster, whether the face, the sound, the situation, that cluster flows into your eyes and ears and effortlessly flows into the chemicals because you already have the pathway. And the same thing for disapproval. Whenever you got disapproval when you were young, then that, like when I see something similar today, it just whoosh goes right in. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it makes sense and it's very clear, and it's also what I also believed. Like, first, you recognize based on the past situation, or it could be a voice, it could be a location, whatever. First is the recognition of the unconscious. Even in a
Yeah,
street, if you're
yeah, yeah,
going,
yeah.
if there's 100 people walking, you recognize your friend, right? Which is unconscious. I'm not even like searching
Yes,
for my friend.
yes,
So there is
exactly.
always an unconscious recognition, which is also called
Yes.
cognition, and then the thought starts, and then
Mhm.
all the either happy chemicals or the cortisol flows based on what the the unconscious mind as a recognition
Yes,
recognize.
yes, yes.
Okay,
The
that's
only thing is, I'm a little bit careful to avoid using the word unconscious
oh,
because it has two negative meanings.
uh-huh.
One negative meaning is in my yoga class that I told you about, my very judgmental yoga class,
Yeah,
where they're always reading you some reading about how we should be, and it's bad to be unconscious. They always saying we must be conscious, we should not be unconscious.
so
And there's all this talk about the
I see.
conscious community and all these conscious people who want to date other conscious people. But the bottom line is that we cannot process everything conscious. So you could think of it. Yeah, exactly. So conscious is maybe 2%. So your brain has to process most things on autopilot just for you to have that 2% free, like to free you up, to have that ability. And that little ability to, I call it like turning around the Titanic, that little bit to steer in a new direction. Like, let's think of a car. It's a huge contraption with a lot of pieces, and that steering wheel is one little tiny part of the car, and yet it has the power to steer you in a new direction. So we do have the power to steer in a new direction, but we should not believe that the steering wheel is all there is. So that's one thing. But the other is that the word unconscious was first used by Sigmund Freud. And he used it in a certain way that perhaps you're familiar with 100 years ago that suggested a specific content of the unconscious. Whereas I think what's more true to say is that our early circuits are built from individual experience rather than, but that our individual experience has a tremendous amount in common because we're all mammals.
Right, from and also, even if you're a mammal, we started as a reptile. So at least the reptilian habits of hunger and reproduction, that is
Yes.
common to everybody, even
Yes.
to begin with. So
Yes.
just let me ask you this quick question, ma'am. So in that case, do you completely subscribe for this triune brain, which says triune brain? Do you totally agree with that concept?
So it depends who you're talking to. In academia, the term is not used, and academics are quick to criticize people who use different terminology. So I have generally tried to avoid these charged words. So what I have tried, and also a lot of people use the reptile brain as a bad thing. You used it correctly.
Yeah.
But many people use it as like a negative. Oh, it's bad to be in your reptile brain. Yeah, which you understand that that's just not realistic. It's we say your reptile brain connects the rest of your brain to your body. So how can you function without that connection? It's part of you. What I just like to focus on that is essential. So you do need the reptilian connection between brain and body. You do need the human brain, which is it's really just data processing. It's pattern recognition. And then what's in between it? The mammal brain is basically social behavior, because reptiles don't live in groups, so they don't have the behavior, they don't have the ability to negotiate social interactions. That's what mammals have that reptiles don't. And so that's the value of thinking of the three different parts.
Oh, I see. But ma'am, funnily, only after I understood you, I understood even and like this triune brain, because you say like the emotions came for survival. Then I took an extra step. Then I understood that basically it was reptiles which existed, and that now the reptile did not had any parental love, right? So that it could not take care of it. So initially they had parental love, so that they could
Parental
develop it.
care. We'll
Care.
call it parental care.
Care. And then living in a group is advantageous for survival. So you had now oxytocin, and now if it is a group of animals, all of them cannot go in all directions, so they should go in one direction. So one guy has to decide, everybody else has to follow. Now comes serotonin, right? So I just extrapolated. Earlier we were reptile, and then reptile has to live together. To live together, you need to have these habits. So that is why the oxytocin came living together. Serotonin is, a leader should be there, because if you are a pack, you cannot go in all direction. You can only go in one direction. To go in one direction, there should be a leader.
Yes.
So serotonin is required. So whichever had serotonin, where somebody can lead, somebody can follow, they survived. People who want to go in their own direction, they will die. So
Yes.
from my point of view, from reptile to these five chemicals to this prefrontal neocortex intellectual thinking from a mental model, I have, like, evolved step by step, is what for me it looks very simple and logical.
Yes, thank you.
Right?
Thank you. And for anyone listening, it's explained in a lot more detail in my books. Um, so, because a lot of people have trouble with the concept of self-interest, or why does a group have to have a leader? So all these things I explain in a lot more detail. But it's funny because with reptiles, they don't tolerate other reptiles. They'll just snap at them. So it's
Yeah.
sort of like saying, like if you see a movie with like two guys that are lost in the desert, and then at some point they have a fight and they split up, and it's like saying, I'd rather die than be with you. Right.
Yeah, that's interesting point of view. Yeah. Okay. But ma'am, okay, so I agree, you generally this word unconscious is got multiple connotations. But then is there any other word you want to use to represent this automatical thought coming and becoming a thinking? Like
Yeah.
how,
I
what do you
just
want to call it?
I call it your myelinated neural network.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Myelinated neural network. But then there is also cognition. Okay. Step one is cognition,
Okay.
which affects the myelinated neural network. And on that, you will get this emotions or chemicals which is secreting, right? Okay. So, but this is always, this is the order. I just want to clarify that, like none of this emotion or happy chemicals or the cortisol does not secrete just on its own. It is always as a shadow to the thought or what you're thinking and the emotional context which you have understood. Is that correct?
Um, you are maybe using it depends how we're using the word cognition.
Okay.
Yes, as long as you don't mean conscious cognition, right? So we have to separate, because some people use the word cognition to mean when I'm consciously aware. So a simple example would be,
Oh, sorry.
right? Yeah, yeah,
No, no.
yeah.
Maybe I should make it very clear. When I say cognition, it is recognition, which is automatic. It's I'm not even consciously, deliberately searching.
Okay.
It is
Yes.
automatic.
Yes.
I think maybe the automatic
Yes.
word might be better. So when I'm walking in a street, automatically my mind is scanning in the
Right.
automatic area. I'm not even deliberately looking. Then it automatically recognizes something
Mhm.
and say, hey, this is my friend. Then the thought has come. If it is a friend, then okay, automatically like a shadow, you will have your positive emotions. And if he's your enemy, the guy who insulted you last week, then immediately the cortisol will start secreting. So is this how the order, ma'am?
Yes, yes. And in real life, of course, our feelings are more complex. You may have some positive feelings toward that person and some negative. A simple example would be there's a person I really like, but I promised that I would do something for them and I haven't done it.
Yeah.
So therefore, I have a bad feeling about seeing them, even though I like them. So we always have mixed emotions.
Okay. Thanks, ma'am. I have a couple of more questions. I don't know how much time you have
It's fine now.
today. Okay. The last two questions. One question is I want to understand the difference between what is what is happening, the emotional power of this secretion of these chemicals between what is actually happening here now and what has happened. Let us assume I just a thought comes about a failure which happened 3 years ago for me. Okay, immediately cortisol secretes and I'm unhappy and all those things, right? Now let us assume now I'm standing somewhere and there's a danger going to happen. A car is coming towards me and all of those things, right? So there is a danger here now. Then there's a chemical which secretes, which forces me into action. Then I act. But something happened long time ago. Then that, let's assume the same car, it was charging towards me, and I think about it 5 years later. So what is the difference between a danger or a happiness or whatever happening here now and something I just recall in my mind which is not happening here now? Just I'm sitting in my room and thinking. So what's the difference between these two?
So, some of our pathways are really big, well developed.
Okay.
And then you could think that that's like a tree with a big trunk, and then there's big branches, and then smaller and smaller branches and leaves.
Yeah.
So, an individual thought is like a leaf. And like you could think, but when you have free time, I think about this and that reminds me of that and that reminds me of that. So maybe I'm tracing the leaf down to this, to this, to this. It's my electricity in my brain is flowing to pathways, sometimes to smaller pathways, like something I haven't thought about in many years. But if I have free time, and it's if you have 2 or 3 entry points, like if 2 or 3 things happen that are similar to that experience from a long time ago,
Yeah.
then there's more electricity in that general region of that circuit. And so even though it's a tiny circuit, electricity can find its way in because it's like it's been in a activated environment,
Okay.
as opposed to your super duper pathways. You think about them effortlessly.
Okay. Okay. Let me rephrase my question.
Okay,
Before
sorry.
leaving from my home, let's assume I get a thought. If the neighbor who lives, if I see, let's assume I have a fight with my neighbor. So now I'm inside my home. I get a thought. if I go out, if I meet this neighbor, then I'll be unhappy, I'll be angry, I want to hit him. This is what I thought. Now I go out, I'm walking in the street, then I actually see him, right? Then I also get this thought and the emotion. So my question is, what is the difference between either the quantity or the
Yes,
quantum
yes, yeah,
or
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
effort
Okay,
or all these things
yes,
about me sitting inside, not seeing him yet? Maybe he's out of city, somewhere else, I don't know.
okay,
I'm just thinking about him, or I actually walking in the street, I see him.
okay,
So what's
good,
the
good.
difference in the
Yeah,
floodgates, which is
yes,
yeah,
yes. You could say it's the quantity of electricity that
oh,
when you see them in person,
yeah,
that you're getting more electricity if it's an actual lived experience
okay,
than if you just think of them. That
okay,
you're activating the same circuits, but with more electricity, so it has more force. Unless you're a person who, like, if you are so mad at your neighbor that you sit there for an hour and think about nothing but how mad you are,
yeah,
which really has to do with your childhood circuits,
oh,
then it could be stronger. But the other
oh,
thing is that when you see the neighbor in real life, you're going to see them with variation.
right,
So the old circuit is more, uh, it's myelinated in the way that happened when you were young. Whereas when you see the person in daily life, one day they're a little more this and the other day they're a little more that. So you're always taking in the new information and updating it and saying, maybe this, maybe that, trying to predict for this specific instance.
oh, I see. This is surprising for me. So if I understand correctly, even if I'm sitting in my room in my basement and thinking about my neighbor, I might have like more anger and more stress than even if in a evening I see him, maybe I'll say hi to him. So there's a possibility that just his thought is like might bring more cortisol than actually maybe meeting him. Is it?
Depending on where you
Right.
focus your energy. So that's
Oh,
the thing.
right.
Like if a person makes an effort to focus or to not focus, like it could be that when you have nothing to do, you dwell and you stew on hurts.
Oh,
Many people do that. Or it could be that when you see the neighbor in real life, you make an effort to smile, you talk about the weather, and that
yeah.
relieves the intensity. Or it
Wow.
could be the opposite. It could
Mhm.
be that this neighbor is like so threatening that as soon as you see them, you're actually afraid, and that has
Oh,
more chemicals. So it depends on the situation.
okay. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay.
This is really
Yeah.
surprising for me. I thought the real life enemy will always be worse
Oh,
than a
yeah.
enemy in my thought. So this is,
Yeah.
I thank you for that. So last
Well, I
question.
think also, but one thing, how much a particular thing bothers a person, I think has very much to do with their early experience. That the person who resembles that pain of your youth, and it doesn't have to be physical, it's like the way they manipulate you, let's say. So one person is annoying, but it doesn't bother me that much. And another person immediately drives me crazy because this person does it in the way that happened to me when I was young, which in my case, it was when they're doing it to you and they're lying about it, or they're doing it to you and then they're projecting and saying that you're doing it to them, you know?
Okay. Mhm.
You
Thank
know.
you. Last question for the evening. Uh,
Okay, and wait, there was one more. I'm sorry, that was ever so. Um, I was trying to have a more upbeat example, a more positive example of this, and then I just forgot it. Okay, sorry.
sure, sure. We can
Rather than just
come back.
fighting with the neighbor. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. So now this is purely a philosophical and spiritual question, even though we started with science. So the question is, see now, there is an automatic part of the mind which is always working, always scanning. Then it recognizes something, then it brings it to the conscious mind. Then it starts thinking. Then emotion comes as a shadow. then you take action or whatever happens, right? In all these things, where is this I, the I? This is
Yeah.
philosophical question, spiritual
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am
Yeah. Yeah.
asking you.
Yeah.
So where do you, from your point of view, either scientific or
Yeah.
personal,
Yeah.
so where
Okay.
is this I?
Okay. Yeah, it's a very good question. And as you probably know, that scientists either they say that there's no agreement or they say that it hasn't been found, or some people, oh, I forgot that there was a it's like three initials. I forgot that there has been some agreement on a certain spot and I forgot what it is. But anyway, Steven Pinker talks about the Swiss Army knife model, which, and that book is already 20 years old, but you know what a Swiss Army knife is, right?
Yes, that is, yeah,
So a Swiss Army knife has many different tools,
right.
but there's no one tool that controls all the other tools. So they're just a bunch of different tools. So you could think of that your brain is a bunch of different tools. It doesn't need to have an eye. So that's possible that it doesn't need to have an eye. Now, what I like to say is what I just said to you. Uh, if like 98% of our processing is automatic, just so that we have enough energy to choose, and that energy, that self, that choice, it's so small. It's, I call it the ability to say, I can stop the thought I'm having, which is I can stop my electricity from flowing down that pathway and divert it to a new pathway. So it's sort of like, again, to use the car analogy, I can stop my car and turn onto a new street. I can't create a new car. I can't create a whole new highway system, but I'm not forced to keep driving in the same direction. I'm not forced to follow the route that Google, proposed.
Yeah,
I have the choice at every moment to put on the brakes and to turn.
okay,
And that's powerful, but still, it's a very limited power. And many people are frustrated because basically it's like, okay, I can stop thinking the thought that comes easily. And once I stop, then I can search for a better thought. There's no perfect answer, but
yeah,
I can search for something better at, like, what we call it, a new interpretation. And if that doesn't work, then I can put on the brakes, stop, and search for new interpretation, which is basically like, let's say water is flowing, your electricity is flowing, you stop it, and then you try to direct that flow into a new neural pathway. And it's hard to redirect yourself from a nice big river into like a tiny little, it's harder to flow down a tiny little pathway. So that to me is the self that can say, I'm not going to go there. Where else could I go? Oh, I'll try this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, I'm going to stop. Where else can I go? Oh, I'll try that. So it's iterative. There's no like, this is me and I am that. That's just a cliche. And the fascinating thing I read, that the cortex can anticipate consequences, right?
yeah,
Now, the curious thing, though, a lot of our ability to anticipate is learned from past experience.
yeah,
So you and I have the same experience, and you anticipate one thing and I anticipate the other. And yet we both have some logic. So if we're playing chess, we might anticipate in the same way because there's also some logical reality.
yeah,
So, what about a monkey or an ape? So, what can a monkey or ape anticipate? Well, what they learned is like they can anticipate consequences 5 minutes from now. So, for example, if there's a banana and I grab the banana, like if they grab the banana when the bigger ape has walked away, but they know that if he's coming right back, he's going to bite them. So, but but if he goes away for longer than 5 minutes, they just go for the banana. So I mean, I don't know if that's exactly a right, but the basic idea is that they could also anticipate consequences, but only the
Short
consequences
term.
that they've actually experienced and only for a short time. So we could do it a much longer time and we can elaborate more on our past experience.
Right. Okay. Uh, Thanks, ma'am. So what you're saying is we always have a choice. In our external behavior, we have to slow down, stop, and think uh, consciously what is good for everyone, and then do what is good. So we always have the choice. We are not slaves of neither our thought, which has come automatically, nor the emotion.
Yes, I would agree with you, but as we've spoken before, most people would not agree with us. You know,
No problem. But
most
then
people will say, most people would say, well, I had no choice, right? How often do we hear people say that? So,
there will always be few people can say whatever they want to say, but then what we are discussing is a general truth, a fact, which is how it was from maybe 5,000 years. Now many people might not even know that. Like, honestly, I was not knowing that there's a choice, that any emotionally charged situation I can always slow down, use the right words, right? Instead of like insulting others, or shooting somebody else, like taking a gun and shooting somebody else. I
yeah,
always have a choice to slow down and think, okay, even if somebody else is insulting me with words, I have a choice to slow down and speak decently using good words peacefully, never to
yeah,
react immediately and take
yeah,
my gun and
yeah,
shoot.
yeah, yeah,
That I was not even aware. Honestly, 5 years ago, I was not even aware that I have a choice for my reactions. I can
yeah,
respond
yeah, yeah,
slowly
yeah,
and understanding that this is my past neural pathway. This is how it is going to go fast. It is how it's going to make
right.
me to react. So
Yeah,
that itself, this message itself, I'm pretty sure if it is goes out, people will
good, good, good.
listen and open their. It will
Yeah.
open their eyes and it will help them in their daily life.
You may have heard the expression, whether you believe in free choice or not, you're right. In other words, yeah. So people who think they don't have free choice, they don't because they believe they don't. But once you know that you have a choice, then you can exercise it. And one way to expand that, what I've tried to teach myself is nothing is worth getting upset over because getting upset is painful and I don't like it. So yet we don't always have the power to control things and you get upset. So I tell myself, okay, what can I do in this situation? What is my power in this situation? Because as soon as I find my power to do something, to start taking action, from as soon as I take that first step, I feel better. Oh, I remember what I was going to say before, too.
Yeah,
Before I take that first step, I tell myself, if this step doesn't work, what is my backup plan? I always have two choices because I know that if I only have one choice, then I feel desperate and threatened and frustrated. So I always have two choices. If this doesn't work, I'll do that. And then before I do the second one, then I always have a third one. So I always have a backup plan so I never feel desperate.
right, ma'am. That is, if you agree and understand, you have a choice. Right? The
Yeah.
problem is between people who believe they have a choice and between people who believe they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you have a choice, you have thousands of choices, right? I mean, there is everything is open for you.
Exactly.
Only if you believe
Exactly.
that I don't have a choice, I have to react now, I have to shoot this guy,
Yeah.
then that
Yeah.
is not even thinking.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if we get some comments, then we can discuss it again if we get comments from people who say they don't have a choice. But we, of course, would like it if people could understand. And again, our choice, it doesn't mean you have the choice that you want. Like if a person says,
Yeah,
well, I want to be a rock star, but they won't hire me, therefore I don't have a choice. So, right?
yeah,
So realistic expectations is
realistic.
always your first choice, right?
Thank you very much, ma'am. Actually, I have a few more questions, but then we'll leave it to next week. Or also based on the comments which I get, I will come back to you and ask more
Okay,
questions.
good. Okay, great. Well, thank you. This is
Thank you.
fabulous.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Have a nice day.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Now, can I just tell you one thing?